Congratulations, everybody, and we're really happy to be here in Florida, and we'll be here forever. Thank you.
Since June 7th, 1990, when Universal Studios Florida opened for the very first time, there have been a bunch of changes when it comes to the shows and attractions that are here at this theme park. And in today's video, we're going to take another trip down memory lane as we look back at some of the shows and attractions that we didn't cover in the first video in this series. So let's head inside and go down memory lane.
Nobody else grabs you, twists you, turns you, hurls you, shakes you, shoots you, rocks you, loves you, and puts you right in the middle of all the action and adventure you've seen on the screen. Not anyone. If you want to go on the greatest rides based on the biggest movies, there's only one place you can. You've got to go to Orlando and go to Universal Studios Florida, the #1 movie studio and theme park in the world. Universal Studios Florida, the only place on earth where you can ride the movies.
And before we go inside, just wanted to say, if you haven't already checked out part 1 of this video, we covered so many shows and attractions in that video, including what the front entrance of Universal Studios Florida used to look like. Now, back in the day, there was no Citywalk. Citywalk is the area that you have to walk through in order to get to the front entrance of Universal Studios. This whole area used to be a giant parking lot, and you would park right in front of the park and walk right in. And that's exactly what we're gonna do right now. Well, we didn't get a chance to park right here, but you know what I mean. I mentioned this in the first video that I did, but the "How tall are you" sign that is in the front entrance of the park only has one opening day attraction remaining, and that is E.T. Adventure. So when you first come through the gates of Universal Studios Florida, you are entering Production Central, and we're gonna kind of go land by land when it comes to this video and the things that we're going to talk about. And we're going to start right here in Production Central, and just to the left over here is where Nickelodeon Studios used to be, and that is where you used to queue up for the Production Tram Tour. Now, the Production Studio Tour was inspired by the Universal Studios Hollywood Tram Tour, which was very popular when that park opened. This attraction opened with the park in 1990 and took guests on a tram tour of the studio facilities here at Universal Studios Florida. Guests boarded this attraction over at Soundstage 19 for a 15-minute ride around the sound stages on property, along with a tour of the park. Now, when Universal Studios opened in 1990, it was selling you on the fact that you were visiting a real working movie and television studio. They used the different areas of the parks for TV productions, movie productions, commercials, and the idea was that you were visiting those locations that some of your favorite shows and movies have been filmed at, and that is what the tram tour focused on. It took you around and showed you the different sound stages where some shows and movies might have been filmed at. You didn't get to go inside of the studios, but you did get to see those studios from the outside. And when guests finished their lap around the park on the trams as part of the Production Studio Tour, they exited through the Universal Studio Store, which is still there today. That is the same Universal Studio Store that was there all those years ago. The Production Studio Tour closed in 1995, and a big reason for that was there just honestly wasn't a whole lot to see. You didn't get to go inside of the sound stages, and it was mostly a glorified tour throughout the park. It had to dodge day guests. There was no set route for the tram that took you outside of like the hustle and bustle of the usual theme park crowd. So you were constantly dodging guests as the tram was driving down the streets of Hollywood, down the streets of New York, which ultimately led to its closure in 1995. And another opening day attraction that you actually passed by when you were on the Production Studio Tour was the Boneyard. It was located where the current Music Plaza stage is, and it featured props from Universal films and TV shows like Back to the Future and Jurassic Park. It was ultimately removed in 2008 when the Music Plaza stage came, but it was actually a pretty cool concept. Now, the Boneyard was considered an attraction, but it wasn't a ride, it wasn't a show, it was basically a collection of a whole bunch of movie props that were just too big to be put in storage, so Universal figured, let's put them out on display for our guests to see and take photos with. It featured vehicles that were used in Ben-Hur, as well as Terminator 2, as well as props from other movies like Jurassic Park and Back to the Future. With this attraction being cleared out to make way for the Music Plaza stage, it was a huge hit for Universal. Now, instead of just being home to a prop museum, essentially, this area of the park can hold multiple concerts a year and bring in thousands of new park guests. Directly across from the Universal Studio store is the current Universe store, but back in the early 90s and into the early 2000s, this was the home of Lucy, a Tribute. Prior to Lucy, a Tribute being here, there used to be another store called Silver Screen Collectibles, which was a movie memorabilia store that sold actual costumes, props, autographs, things of the like, almost like the predecessor to the prop shop that used to be over here at Universal as well. But the Lucy Tribute replaced a portion of that store and featured many original artifacts celebrating the life of Lucille Ball, one of the most influential comedians, not only of her time, but of all time. Inside of Lucy, a Tribute, you could find costumes, jewelry, personal letters, as well as all 5 Emmy Awards that Lucy won for I Love Lucy, all on display right here at Universal Studios. Universal Studios Hollywood had a similar walkthrough attraction that opened in 1989, and they had so much memorabilia left over from the Hollywood version that they decided to open one here on the East Coast at Universal Studios Florida. In addition to the props and the Emmy Awards that were inside of this walkthrough exhibit, there was also a complete recreation of the set for the I Love Lucy show. What's important about this set recreation is it shows how innovative Lucy and her production team were in using the 3-camera format for sitcoms that is still used by many shows and productions in television to this day. Lucy, a Tribute ultimately closed on August 17th, 2015, with the Hello Kitty store opening in March of 2016. And once again, if you didn't check out part 1 of this video series where we talk about Hanna-Barbera, which used to be in the home of Minions, as well as Alfred Hitchcock, The Art of Making Movies, which then became Shrek 4D, which was right here in this building, make sure you do so. I'll put it up in the corner and down in the description. Now behind me is Transformers The Ride 3D, but before this attraction was here, there were 2 other attractions that were not necessarily in this building, but in this general area. The first of those being the Murder, She Wrote Mystery Theater. This was an opening day show and attraction that opened with the park on June 7th, 1990. Guests were selected to be producers on a new episode of the Murder, She Wrote TV series, which was quite popular at the time. The premise of the attraction was that you are the newest executive producer of the hit show, and you have to help usher in the latest episode throughout the entire post-production process. Universal described the attraction in the early 90s as, quote, "Your role as executive producer, working with Angela Lansbury. It's your chance to pick the stars, storyline, and crooks, pick the best takes, and try to get the show done right, on time, and on budget." Guests were taken through multiple rooms, and the attraction focused on effects such as makeup, sound, and visual effects, along with the process of editing an episode of Murder, She Wrote. It really took you behind the scenes of what it takes to put a TV show together, and it tied in perfectly with the overall theme of Universal Studios, which was showing you the magic behind movie making and television making. The Murder, She Wrote Mystery Theater lasted about 6 years and closed in 1996 after the Murder, She Wrote television show was canceled. It was then replaced with Hercules and Xena, Wizards of the Screen, which was a combination of 2 shows that were out at the time, obviously one focusing on Hercules and the other Xena the Warrior Princess. It was extremely similar to Murder, She Wrote in the sense that it focused on the creation of a TV show, but instead of focusing on Murder, She Wrote, it focused on the production of these 2 television shows. The concept was similar, with guests going throughout multiple rooms and learning what it takes to put a television show together. The final performance was on February 20th, 2000, and it was replaced by Transformers The Ride 3D in 2013, which is still here at Universal Studios today. Now, I mentioned before it was in the area of Transformers The Ride 3D, and that's because the actual theater where the Murder, She Wrote Mystery Theater was, as well as Hercules and Xena, was torn down, and the building that you see in front of you here, which now is the home of Transformers The Ride 3D, went up in its place. The building closed in 2000 and actually sat abandoned until 2004, wherein it was used for a Halloween Horror Nights house, and then the following year was demolished to make way for Transformers The Ride 3D. Another opening day attraction that was in this area was the MCA Recording Studio. This was an interactive exhibit that showcased various sound and recording effects used in post-production of movies, television shows, and the like. There was also a chance for guests to interact with various sound editing effects or techniques, which link back to Universal Studios' focus on production. The MCA Recording Studio closed in 1996 and was replaced with Stage 54 the following year in 1997. Stage 54, conveniently located in Soundstage 54, featured props and displays from current Universal Studio movies at the time, like Jurassic Park, as well as The Mummy. It ultimately closed in 2003 and was replaced with Donkey's Photo Finish, which was a fan favorite meet and greet that is currently no longer at Universal Studios, but will be returning once DreamWorks Land opens this summer. Now, I couldn't find exactly where this was located, but there was a stage near the area of the Murder, She Wrote Mystery Theater, and it was home to the Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle show. The Adventures of Rocky and Bullwinkle show opened in 1992 and was a live stage show that featured characters from the television series of the same name, including Rocket J. Squirrel, Rocky, Bullwinkle, Boris Badenov, and Dudley Do-Right. The show closed in 1993 to make way for Startoons, which took place in the same area and was another live stage show, but instead of featuring the Rocky and Bullwinkle characters, it featured the Hanna-Barbera characters, such as Fred Flintstone, George Jetson, Scooby-Doo, and Yogi Bear. The Rocky and Bullwinkle show only lasted about a year, but Startoons had a much longer run, lasting 3 years before its closure in 1996. There was a new version of the show that opened in 1998 and featured Woody Woodpecker and Curious George back in the Kid Zone section of the park, or what would become the Kid Zone section of Universal Studios. And as we make our way around the building where the Murder, She Wrote Mystery Theater and Hercules and Xena was, as well as the recording studio, we are going to head into the New York section of the park. And we touched on some attractions that were here in the previous video, such as Twister, Ghostbusters, but there are some things that we didn't cover, and we're going to talk about those right now. Of course, back in the day, this was the home of the Ghostbusters. You can see the recreation of the Ghostbusters firehouse, which now has Hollywood Rip Ride Rocket going through it. And as we turn to the right, you can see the New York Public Library as well, another piece of the Ghostbusters set, and all of this area was used for various Ghostbusters shows and attractions. It wasn't just the Ghostbusters Spooktacular that was over here. There were actually 2 Ghostbusters shows that took place right in front of the public library. Nowadays, this section of the park is predominantly used for queues for Halloween Horror Nights houses. There's 2 houses that come right through here, but back in the day, almost every inch of Universal Studios was used for a show or some sort of an attraction, including the New York Public Library. And like I said, there were 2 Ghostbuster shows that took place here back in the day, and even included Beetlejuice. That's right. I know you probably wouldn't expect Beetlejuice to be mixed with the Ghostbusters, but it was the 90s and anything could happen. The first show was Street Busters. It opened in 1991, and it was a show that featured the Ghostbusters trying to catch Beetlejuice. Talk about a crossover. Way before the multiverse and all the things that Marvel were doing, Universal was crossing Ghostbusters with Beetlejuice. All 4 of the Ghostbusters were featured in the show. The Ecto-1 was featured in the show as well. And even Slimer himself was in this show too. So guests had the opportunity to see not only their favorite Ghostbusters and Beetlejuice, but Slimer. How cool was that? The show featured the Ghostbusters taking on Beetlejuice, who would then kind of possess the Ghostbusters and have them dance to all modern pop hits from the time. There was another version of this that came many, many years later. So Street Busters closed in 1993. It ran for about 2 years. And then on October 1st, 2002, Extreme Ghostbusters, The Great Fright Way opened, and that ran until February 25th, 2005. And essentially it was an updated version of the original Street Busters show. This would be the last of the Ghostbusters here at Universal Studios until 2019, when the Ghostbusters had a featured house at HHN 29. Now, at the time of filming this video, it is April 2024. The Ghostbusters are heavily rumored to return here to Universal Studios with a house at Halloween Horror Nights. So we'll see if that comes true. Obviously, if you're watching this in the future, you'll know whether or not it did come true. But Ghostbusters Frozen Empire is rumored to have a house here at HHN. So fingers crossed, we'll see. They're also rumored to be a part of the summer tribute store as well as the new summertime parade that's coming. So if you are somebody that is nostalgic for old school Universal, I have a feeling this is going to be a great summer. We have a new Lagoon show coming, we have a parade coming, the tribute store is supposed to have a nostalgic theme. We're going to find out all the details about that in the coming weeks. And once again, if you're watching this in the future, you'll know whether I'm completely right or if I was completely wrong. But either way, anytime the Ghostbusters have a chance to come back at Universal, it's a win for me. Now, many of you, when you think Marvel and Universal, probably think of Islands of Adventure and Marvel Superhero Island, but did you know that the very first time that Marvel characters appeared in a Universal park was right behind me here at the Metropolis Tribune, where there was a Marvel stage show that took place here at Universal Studios. Located right next to the Ghostbusters Firehouse, here is the Metropolis Tribune, which is now the entrance to Escape to New York starring Jimmy Fallon, but this was the home of the Marvel Superhero Stunt Show. It featured characters such as Spider-Man, Iron Man, Wolverine, the rest of the X-Men. It opened in 1993, closed in 1995. It even had some crazy things going on, like Spider-Man rappelling down the building. You think Spider-Man on buildings, you think Avengers Campus out in Disneyland, but he actually did it over here on the East Coast first in Universal Studios, Florida. X-Men were prominently featured in the show. They were really, really popular at the time. Obviously, the X-Men had a resurgence with the movies in the early 2000s starring Hugh Jackman, but back then there was the original animated series of the X-Men show, and the characters were super, super popular. And if you look at some of the pictures that are on the screen, Iron Man came flying out. There were special effects. Also, look how cool that comic book accurate Iron Man is. There is Sabretooth fighting Wolverine as well on the stage. Even Dr. Doom was a part of the show, so this was really the first step of Universal incorporating the Marvel characters into their parks. And like I mentioned, a lot of people think of Islands of Adventure when it comes to Marvel and Universal, but now you know that it happened here on the studio side first. And as we get a closer look at the building today and match it up with that shot of Iron Man flying out, it would have taken place right here, directly above the Jimmy Fallon sign. You can see the end of the top of that building right there, just underneath the T to the left of it, of Tribune. And then you have those two windows where the corner meets those windows right there. That's exactly where Iron Man was back in the day. Opening in March 1991, just next to the entrance of Confrontation, was the Screen Test home video adventure. This was the first upcharge experience that Universal had in the parks, and it was a way for guests to step into a film. There were two different options of movies that they could step into. I believe one was Star Trek, and then the other one was a mashup of like King Kong, Earthquake, things of the like, and guests could purchase the video with themselves in it. It took place in front of a blue screen, and Universal had some extra space in front of Kong, which is now Revenge of the Mummy, and they figured, let's utilize the space and make another kind of create your own adventure video type of offering. And the price of this, when this first opened, was almost the exact same price as a one-day ticket to Universal, which is crazy. I can't imagine they sold too many of those. We're now going to move back to the San Francisco section of the park, which was home to two stage shows that have been replaced by Fast and the Furious Supercharged. The first of those being an American Tail Theater. This was an opening day show that opened on June 7th, 1990 and closed in 1992. Similar to Murder, She Wrote and the Ghostbusters and all the other properties that Universal was cashing in on from the late 80s and early 90s, they decided to take that same concept and use an American Tail, which is an animated movie from 1986, and turn it into a stage show here inside the park. This was a show that was geared towards kids, and you have to remember that Woody Woodpecker's Kids Zone wasn't open yet. It was still many, many years away. So this stage show did a retelling of the first movie as well as the second film, and featured the characters from An American Tail and 50 Goes West. The show's fate only lasted 2 years until Beetlejuice moved in with the Beetlejuice Rock and Roll Graveyard Revue. Now, there were 4 different iterations of this show before it ultimately closed in 2016, but the original version featured Beetlejuice coming to life and bringing the Universal monsters on stage with him to rock out to classic rock songs from years prior. Beetlejuice would also come into the crowd, interact with guests, and tell some inappropriate jokes, which was very on brand for Beetlejuice. The show opened in May 1992, and like I mentioned, was replaced by Fast and the Furious Supercharged. Like I mentioned, there were 4 different versions of this show over the years, but the overall premise was the same. Beetlejuice invites all his classic Universal Monsters buddies on stage to join him and sing various pop culture songs, rock and roll songs, and the gist of the show was the same. Even though they changed the name multiple times and they changed the music, the general premise remained. While we're over here in the Amity San Francisco section, I'm actually sitting on the pier outside of Lombard's. I've literally never done this before. Never come on this little pier section, but I wanted to say, as I was researching for this video, I never, I guess, realized how many live shows that Universal did here over the years. And you come here now, there's not a lot of shows that take place during the day. You still have Animal Actors, you still have the Horror and Makeup Show. There might be a couple that I'm forgetting, like the Blues Brothers, things along those lines, but there used to be so much more live entertainment that took place here at Universal. It really, really made me nostalgic for like old school Universal Studios, because if you were here in the 90s, if you were here in the early 2000s, it was definitely a special time. I still love Universal, don't get me wrong. It's one of my favorite places to come, but when you take a look back and you see all of the really cool, like interactive things that were here in the past, it makes you kind of wish that some of those could come back now. And before we get to the next couple of attractions, just wanted to say there is a ton of time and research that goes into putting a video like this together. So if you're enjoying it, if you enjoy these historical deep dives, make sure you give it a thumbs up, share it with a friend. I would be forever grateful. We are back in the World Expo section of the park, and this stage was the former home of 2 shows. The first being the Wild 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 West Stunt Show, which premiered in 1991 and ran until 2003. That show was ultimately replaced with Fear Factor Live in 2005, which ran until 2020. Now, I never got to experience the Wild 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 West Stunt Show, but I did get to experience Fear Factor Live, and I remember it vividly. From 2005 until 2010, this was a seasonal attraction. It ran full-time starting summer 2010, aside from Halloween Horror Nights. The attraction was based off of the NBC television series Fear Factor and featured Universal guests becoming contestants in various stunts inspired by the show. Now, in modern times, back over here in the World Expo section of the park is Men in Black Alien Attack, but prior to that, this was home of the Swamp Thing set, which opened in 1990 and then was demolished in 1994. The Swamp Thing set was actually built for the filming of the television series Swamp Thing. It opened with the theme park on June 7, 1990, so another opening day attraction, and the sets were featured as part of the production studio tour. It lasted until 1994 and then was demolished once the television show was canceled. Now, this area sat completely vacant until 2000, until Men in Black Alien Attack was built in its place. And just a little fun fact about Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing is actually a DC Comics character, and I mentioned earlier they had the Marvel show that took place here in the park. The Swamp Thing set was the only thing at Universal that was tied to a DC property. We can't talk about movie sets at Universal Studios Florida without talking about the most famous of them all, and that was the screen-used Psycho set. In 1960, Alfred Hitchcock shocked the world with Psycho. One of the most iconic horror movies of all time was actually filmed out on the West Coast on the Universal Studios Hollywood backlot. Like any other movie franchise, if you have a successful first movie, sequels tend to follow, and Psycho was no different. When it was time to film the 4th installment of the Psycho franchise, they decided to move the production out east to Universal Studios Florida. Psycho 4: The Beginning became the first full-length production that was shot at Universal Studios Florida. Production for this film was supposed to start in 1988, but they decided to move it back until 1990 to align with the grand opening of Universal Studios. Like I mentioned earlier in this video, the marketing was based around the movie-making aspect of this brand new Florida park, and what better way to usher in a movie studio-focused theme park than by filming a movie right when the park opens. The filming schedule began in May 1990, just a few weeks before Universal Studios Florida was to open. They used other areas of Universal Studios as well for the production, including shooting the indoor scenes in Soundstage 21. The Swamp Thing set, located in the back of the park, was also used as well, but the film's major outdoor scenes were purposefully shot after the theme park opened in June 1990, and those took place at the Bates Motel and the Psycho House. Universal used the original blueprints from the 1960 version that sat out at Universal Studios Hollywood to recreate the models for Orlando. The Bates Motel was demolished in 1995 and replaced with A Day in the Park with Barney. The Bates Mansion lasted a little bit longer until 1998, when it was demolished to make way for Curious George Goes to Town, which was a water play area and a ball pit that remained in that section of the park for many years to come. Here today at the park is the Bourne Stuntacular stunt show, which is absolutely incredible, and this ended up replacing Terminator 2 3D Battle Across Time a few years back. So let's take a look back at Terminator 2 3D that was here for many years prior. T2 3D Battle Across Time opened on April 27th, 1996 and closed on October 9th, 2017 to make way for the aforementioned Bourne Stuntacular. Located in the Hollywood section of the park, this is a combination of a live-action show as well as a 3D show based on Terminator 2 Judgment Day. The show held 700 seats, and guests were there to see a demonstration of Cyberdyne's newest creation, the Cyberdyne Series 70 Autonomous Infantry Unit, T-70 Terminators for short. Guests were then instructed to put on their safety visors, aka 3D glasses, to watch a demonstration of these T-70 Terminators in action. Of course, things go wrong, and Arnold Schwarzenegger has to come and save the day. He bursts through the movie screen through a time portal on the signature Harley-Davidson motorcycle, which was an actual actor riding into the auditorium. At the end of the show, one of the main characters from the films, Sarah, says that she owes her life to the Terminator for saving John's life. And then the show ends and guests exit through the theater. This was a very, very cool show. This is another one that I remember vividly experiencing during my early years here at Universal, and the show that's there in its place is absolutely amazing. The Bourne Stuntacular is so good. Of course, you have the nostalgia for what was here prior, but from a technological standpoint, the Bourne Stuntacular might be the best show in all of Orlando in terms of theme parks. Staying in the Hollywood section of the park, you may be familiar with Cafe La Bamba, a quick service dining restaurant located at Universal Studios. But did you know that there were two walkthrough attractions that were here prior? The first of those being How to Make a Mega Movie Deal. Opening in 1991, a year after the park opened, this attraction lasted until 1993, when it closed to make way for AT&T at the movies. It was very similar to the Lucy, a tribute attraction, paying homage to Hollywood and filmmaking. When guests first entered the attraction, they watched a short film about Jack Archer, a young man who worked his way up from mailboy to movie mogul. And while this attraction closed in 1993, its successor, AT&T at the movies, didn't open until 1998. This was also a short-lived attraction, closing in 2001, with Cafe La Bamba opening the following year. Just like the perfect day at Universal Studios, we're gonna close out this video with the nighttime shows. There have been 3 nighttime spectaculars that have taken place at the Lagoon at Universal Studios Florida And the first one that opened with Universal on June 7th, 1990 was the Dynamite Nights Stunt Spectacular. This live stunt show themed to Miami Vice was located on the lagoon right in the center of the park. This 20-minute show featured pyrotechnics, fire, explosions, and live actors circling the lagoon on jet skis. This was an action-packed way to end your day at Universal Studios, Florida, and the attraction came to a close on February 17th, 2000. After almost 10 years of performances. There was no nighttime show at the lagoon for about 6 years until Universal 360, a Cinesphere Spectacular, replaced Dynamite Nights on July 1st, 2006. Universal 360, a Cinesphere Spectacular, was a nighttime fireworks show also located on the lagoon in the middle of Universal Studios, featuring famous scenes from a number of Universal Pictures films throughout the years. These scenes were projected onto large inflated domes within the lagoon, while various fireworks, flame effects, lasers, lights, and water effects were set off. It's a personal preference whether this type of nighttime show is something that you would enjoy versus the physical, high-flying action style of a show like Dynamite Nights was. But there's no doubt that a Cinesphere Spectacular was the first step in moving towards the modern nighttime spectaculars that we see at Universal today and will likely see at Universal for years to come. The show was removed on September 9th, 2011 and was replaced by Universal's Cinematic Spectacular, 100 Years of Movie Memories on May 8th, 2012. The show was narrated by actor Morgan Freeman as a part of the 100th anniversary celebration for Universal Studios. The show closed on October 10th, 2017, and a new nighttime show came in its place named Universal Orlando's Cinematic Celebration, opening on July 16th, 2018 and closing on March 9th, 2023. All right, that is going to do it for part 2 of our historical deep dive of Universal shows and attractions. I really enjoyed making this video. It's always fun to look back on things that used to be here in the past and kind of reminisce on the good old days of Universal, although there's definitely some good days coming up ahead with Epic Universe opening next year. So, like I mentioned earlier, a lot of time and effort goes into making a video like this one. There's a lot of research that I do on all the different shows and attractions that were here, finding the old footage, overlaying that. So if you enjoyed this video, all you need to do is give it a nice big thumbs up. It's a huge help to me, it's a huge help to the channel, and it will tell YouTube that more people are gonna like this video just like you did. So if you enjoyed it, make sure you give it a nice big thumbs up. If you're new to our channel, subscribe down below so you don't miss out on all of our future Universal and theme park content to come. And with that being said, we'll see you guys real soon.